revolutionary greetings. I bring you greetings from South Africa on behalf of your comrades and friends in South Africa. And I must thank the conference organizers as well as all those who were involved in bringing this together. And thank you for the honor for giving me to present at this conference. The Sykes-Picot Agreement and the history of the emergence of the nation state in the Middle East, that is the mandate which I have been given to focus on. This agreement at the very onset must be understood to be a poisonous legacy. Capitalist modernity is history's deadliest and most continuous crisis of civilization. In particular, the general destruction of the last 100 years has disrupted thousands of evolutionary links in society and the natural environment. How long can humanity go on enduring this poisonous legacy, which has inflicted far-reaching devastation and disintegration of society and the environment? How will humanity soothe the pain and agony of the consequences of that agreement that led to war, unemployment, hunger, and poverty? The claim that the newly created states, nation states, post the Sykes-Picot Agreement would protect society is nothing but a vast illusion. On the contrary, society has been increasingly militarized by the nation states and fully submerged in war. Mr. Abdullah Öcalan, or Leader Apo, calls this war a society-side. It is imposed in two ways, he teaches us. Firstly, that the power and state apparatus control, oppress, and also surveil or surveillance in society becomes paramount. Secondly, the information and the technology and the monopolies of media of the past decades has replaced society with a virtual one. Just look at all the social media, as well as media that's distorted to shape the narrative of the imperialists. Up against the canons of nationalism, religionism, sexism, scientism, and arts, the entertainment industry, which includes sports and soap operas, with which society is being battered 24/7 by the media. How can that society be then defended? According to Abdullah Öcalan, or Leader Apo, it has become quite clear that nation states in the Middle East, and may I add, globally, is in fact one of capitalist modernity's tools of domination. What the Treaty of Versailles was to Europe, the Sykes-Picot Agreement drawn up between the British and the French in 1916 is to the Middle East, a peace to end all peace, and which Lenin rightly called an agreement of the colonial thieves, was entered into behind the backs of the populations of the countries there, and behind the backs of those people in the territories in question. As Leon Trotsky, the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, declared in the Izvestia number 221 on the 23rd of November 1917, on page 4 of that publication, he said the government of workers and peasants abolished the secret diplomacy with its intrigues, ciphers, and lies. He then further tells us that they had nothing to hide, and the program was to express the desire of the workers, the people, and the peasants, and a speedy peace on the basis of honest relations, not deceptions like those who drew up the Sykes-Picot Agreement, must be the basis of agreements. The abolition of the supremacy of capital must continue. And they made known to the world the secret agreements that took place unknown to the people. According to that agreement, Russia would control over what would later become Eastern Turkey. And of course, once the Bolsheviks came into power, they cancelled that arrangement. While France would continue to control what would be later southern Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, and northern Iraq. Britain, with its fraudulent promises to local leaders, would receive territory in what would later be Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Kuwait. And with the publication of those secret agreements, the outrage and indignation towards the Bolsheviks in the imperialist capitals reached new heights. Among the oppressed masses around the world, the Bolsheviks won incalculable prestige. The Sykes-Picot allocated part of northern Kurdistan and a substantial part of the Mosul Vilayet, including the city of Mosul, to France in what they called Area B. Russia obtained Bitlis and Van in northern Kurdistan. The contemplated Arab state included Kurds in its eastern limit, split between the A and B areas. Bowman tells us there were more than 2 million Kurds in Turkey, mainly in the mountain region called Kurdistan. Sharif Pasha, known as the Pasha or Sharif Pasha, presented a memorandum on the claims of the Kurdish people to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. And that report that was suppressed, the Crane Commission also then recommended a form of autonomy in the natural geographical area which lay between the proposed Armenia and the north and Mesopotamia in the south, with the divide between the Euphrates and Tigris as the western boundary and the Persian frontier as the eastern. The Russians gave up the territorial claims, as I stated earlier, once the Bolshevik Revolution took place, and at the San Remo Conference, the French were awarded the French Mandate of Syria, and the English the British Mandate of Mesopotamia. The subsequent Treaty of Sèvres provided for a Kurdish territory subject to a referendum within the League of Nations within a year of that treaty. However, the Turkish War of Independence led to the treaty being superseded by the Treaty of Lausanne. And this month, July, is the 100th or century anniversary of that heinous treaty, in which no provision for a Kurdish state was even included, and nor were the Kurds part of that arrangement when it took place. The result then was, along with the Syrian neighbors, they were divided between Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. The only aim of the negotiations was the dismemberment of the empire, the previous Ottoman Empire. At one point, there was a possibility of reaching a deal that satisfied both the Russians and the British. But the French put a stop to that. They demanded not only control of Syria, but of Turkey itself. If the Sykes-Picot was made official by the Allied powers of the First World War, for the San Remo Conference in 1920. In the end, however, Russia would get Constantinople, the territories adjacent to the Bosphorus, and the British would get Basra and southern Mesopotamia, and the French would get Lebanon, Syria, and Cilicia, which is in modern day, which is currently in Turkey. Palestine would be an international territory, and whatever that might have meant, it never ever went that way. Italy was given a control of Turkey's southwest, and Greece was allocated control of Turkey's western coasts. But the final result would be decided not by the scrap of a paper. And eventually, the Greek army was defeated by the new Turkish state. The barbaric expulsion of the Greeks from Asia Minor, which generated feelings of mutual hatred and fear between Greeks and Turks, has poisoned relations between them for generations. In the same way, the bloody conflict between the Arabs and the Jewish people can be traced to the dirty deals of the First World War, as well as the killings we see every day in Rojava, southern Turkey, and elsewhere that the Kurds must bear the brunt of. Britain had promised Palestine to both Arabs and Jews. In the end, the Palestinians lost fully. So while Britain was negotiating with Hussein bin Ali, the Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour wrote a letter to Baron Walter Rothschild, a close friend of the Zionist movement leader, Chaim Weizmann, promising to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. That was around the 2nd of November 1917. As these are all the consequences of Sykes-Picot. The standpoint of imperialism was clearly expressed by the British Prime Minister Lloyd George in a secret session at the House of Commons on the 10th of May 1917, when he shocked the House by his bluntness. The Prime Minister intended to deny France the position that Mark Sykes, or Sir Mark Sykes, had promised in the post-war for the Middle East. And he took the view that the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the physical possession of those lands was all that mattered. Regarding Palestine, he told the British ambassador to France in April 1917 that the French would be obliged to accept a fait accompli, And the words used were, "We shall be there by conquest and shall remain." One could not wish for a clearer exposure of the brutal reality of the imperialist politics and their diplomacy. Might is right. What we have, we hold. It was expressed far more eloquently long ago by Heraclitus when he said, "War is the father of all and king of all." And some he manifested as gods, some as men, some he made slaves, and some free. That was the result of this poisonous agreement that led eventually to the Treaty of Lausanne. As Lloyd George had predicted, Palestine was pocketed by Britain, along with a huge slice of former Arab territories. France got what was left. Mosul was first apportioned to France, but finally handed over to Britain, which joined in the future of Iraq. Unfortunately for the Kurds, who aspired for their homeland, their claims were ignored completely. To keep the French quiet, Syria was handed over to them, and they had effective control of the greater Lebanon, although it was nominally in the hands of the Maronite Christians. Given the complex mixture of the ethnic groups, their faiths, and that small country, that was a recipe that to this day has instability and war, economic challenges, and societal problems to this very day in Lebanon. According to the conditions of that poisonous Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the British and French, which was, as I indicated earlier, made public by the Soviet government. France was awarded territories, French troops, primarily colonial units, and the French Armenian Legion occupied southern Turkey. The primary strategic goal was the resources. Are they, the imperialists, still interested in that first, before all their so-called double standards and hypocrisy on human rights, freedom, and dignity? Indeed, it remains so. They must first furnish compensation in the billions of dollars for the havoc and the plundering of the region's resources as a start to show a genuine remedy of their wrongs, and insist that NATO, their partner in NATO, Turkey, releases Abdullah Öcalan and all political prisoners, and in that way would open up spaces for engagement in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. The existence of nation states is an anomaly in the Middle Eastern history as a consequence of that poisonous agreement, and the insistence on them leads to disaster. The Turkish nation state believed with the final genocide of the Kurdish people, it would make itself eternal, a nation state integrated in its own country and nation. Clearly, unless Turkey abandons this paradigm and the other regional powers hell-bent on destroying the Kurdish people and its friends, it will be a mere gravedigger for the region's peoples and social cultures, including the Turkish people and the peoples of the regions in an entirety. The situation of the Kurds, chopped up into pieces by nation states in the Middle East, imposed different forms of annihilation and assimilation upon each of these parts, is a complete catastrophe. Kurds are, as it were, condemned to a long-term deadly agony. The conditions have now matured, and the Kurds, through their struggle, organization, and mobilization on the principles and ideas and philosophy of Abdullah Öcalan, can make their way out of the pincer movement of genocide. This is only possible through the project of a democratic nation, one based on free and equal citizens, existing together in solidarity, encompassing all cultural and religious realities. This is, then, a project designed to be forged together with the peoples in the region. The methodology or the method for achieving that goal is now developing step by step. We see it in Rojava or northeastern Syria, or the autonomous administration of northeastern Syria. That autonomous, multi-ethnic, multi-religion self-administration is based on the freedom of women, is rising like a beacon of freedom. We must accept this. This presents a moral solution for both the peoples of the Middle East, Western Asia, and all nation states. The model proposes not the denial of nation states, but proposes that they be bound to a democratic constitutional solution. This will ensure that the existence and autonomy of both continues. The rich heritage of ethnic, religious, and denominational entities and their cultures in this region or in the Middle East and Western Asia can only be held together through a democratic nation, democratic confederalism mindset. one that fosters peace, equality, freedom, and democracy. Each culture, on the one hand, builds itself as a democratic national group. They then can live on a higher level of democratic union with all cultures that they already have been living with for centuries. The democratic nation solution proposed by the brave Kurds has enabled them to eliminate Daesh and ISIS on behalf of all humanity. Daesh was a result of religious extremism, the US and European interests that had nothing to do but with their allies in the region. There is no doubt that the result of the paradigm of democratic confederalism and democratic union based on women's freedom is a role model for all the world and would reverse the legacy of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. At present, the developments in northern and eastern Syria have reached a very important point. Therefore, the recognition of the autonomous administration of Rojava must be acceded to by the US, UK, France, and the rest of the international community. And the local democracy it represents for the Arab, Kurdish, Armenian, Assyrian, and other peoples is a very important development for both Syria and the wider Middle East. Our call then for people to return from Europe, Turkey, and elsewhere will only be possible once a democratic constitution for all peoples in Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran is declared. The view on the Kurdish-Turkish conflict, the Syrian Kurdish conflict, Iranian Kurdish conflict, Iraqi Kurdish conflict has gone on for nearly a century, is absolutely clear. Lidar and the Kurds have been developing a democratic solution for the Kurdish question. From 1993, that stance was seen in the 2013 talks with the Turkish nation-state held in Imran. It expressed the Nowruz Declaration as part of the dialogue process. That is today more important than ever. This was then reinforced in the 7-point declaration that was put forth in 2019. We must insist on the need for social reconciliation and a democratic negotiation to replace the culture of polarization and conflict. Problems can be solved not with tools of violence, but with soft power. Under favorable conditions, Leader Apo is the key to eliminate the conflict within a week if he was released unconditionally. As for the states that are inimical to democracy in the region, they are at a crossroads. They should choose the right course, for history will judge them harshly and their own generations to follow. It can either continue on its path toward unraveling like other nation states or enter into a dignified peace and a meaningful democratic solution. Ultimately, everything will be determined by the struggle between the parties. The success of the struggle waged by the Kurds and freedom-loving people through their politics for peace and democracy shall determine the end result. Unlike the Machiavellianism of the imperialists, freedom shall prevail. I thank you